Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video we're taking a first look at the ZimaBlade. This is a pretty interesting enthusiast slash DIY style mini PC. So as a contrast to the majority of other models we've seen that are pre-installed with Windows, it actually comes with Casa OS, which is a Linux operating system. And of course you can install Windows on it if you want, but it's more designed as an alternative to something like a Raspberry Pi, albeit one with slightly higher end internals. And that's because just like most of the other mini PCs running on Windows, it is using a Intel Celeron processor. So it's not going to be lightning fast, but still more so than something like an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. By contrast, you can choose between dual core and quad core option, and it has an expansion RAM slot compatible with up to 16GB cards for DDR3 and also has 32 gigs of built-in eMMC storage for the operating system, but it does have a SATA port that allows you to connect external SSDs and hard drives. In fact, one of the most popular use cases of something like this would be your own personal server or NAS, and it basically connects to the internet and you're able to then have your own cloud backup solution as an alternative to paying for services like Google Drive, for example, or OneDrive or something like Amazon AWS if you want to actually keep all of the hardware locally in your room and you don't need a ton of storage that is. So it's actually a pretty interesting concept, so it basically allows you to own everything that you are using and backing up, including the actual mini server here. And so they're calling this a mini PC designed for cyber natives. And as you can tell here, it supports multiple operating systems, including Android, that you can flash onto it. And here are the different configuration tiers. The processor here uses about 6 to 10 watts, so it's pretty energy efficient, and otherwise it's very lightweight. So a lot of these components are just off the shelf, but you can use your own if desired, including a standard 12-watt USB Type-C. And this thing is also very affordable, surprisingly, for one that has a fairly interesting looking design with this, again, translucent shell, almost a cyberpunk aesthetic, but the base model with the dual-core Celeron only goes for $80, whereas the quad-core one actually bumps it up a little bit more to $120. So you can pick accordingly, but both of those are actually cheaper than a Windows mini PC with equivalent specs. Most of these ones, such as this Mealy mini PC stick, actually retail for around $200 to $250. However, maybe part of the cost goes into licensing for Windows that, again, you're not getting on here by default. It's using a free distribution of Linux, but again, up to you if you want to hack and play around with it. It's really going after that DIY crowd as the main target audience. So if you expect something extremely polished right out of the box with full documentation and plug-and-go simplicity, this is probably not the one for you. But still pretty cool nonetheless as another option to consider. Packaging also looks quite good, and then on the back we have just some of the specs reiterated again. So aside from the USB Type-A 3.0 port, you also get, again, the Type-C for power that can also be used for display, and also has 2 SATA slots, so you can connect up to 2 SSDs or hard drives. And they also have a slogan here that says, "The world we live in does not belong to ourselves. Everything, including water, energy, and food, is predominated by giant corps. The internet, central to society, will soon become a battleground for freedom of humanity. The only thing we have are our minds." A pretty interesting message there from the company, which is called Ice Whale, and again, presented quite well in this cyberpunk style they're going after. On the inside, you also get a thank you note with even more details from that team, as well as just a quick start guide. But this thing is extremely light. I already took a peek at it, and even things like opening up the casing here requires you to kind of figure out for yourself. So again, some tinkering is definitely needed, and we have, of course, the mini PC inside of the shell here, and underneath you also find a couple of additional decal stickers still in that cyberpunk style if you want to decorate the casing even more, as well as a USB Type-C to Type-C cable, as well as an included SATA cable for connecting, again, SSDs and external hard drives. So anyways, a closer look at the construction, starting with the I/O here. We have those 2 SATA slots along with SATA power. So again, this thing can completely operate and turn on those hard drives that are being connected onto it in addition to data. And then finally on the side here, we also have a PCIe 2.0 slot. Definitely not something we see on most off-the-shelf mini PCs, but this PCIe slot is good for connecting graphic cards if you want to improve the GPU performance, as well as other SSDs and network interface cards. However, just note that you may have to remove the plastic shell here if you want to snap the card all the way in, since it doesn't really slide into this chassis. As part of a graphic card, for example, that may have an outer edge that requires a little bit more firmness, so just keep that part in mind, but still good to have this port. And on the other side, we have a mini display port as well, if you want to use this instead of the Type-C, which is full spec 3.1 that also supports, again, power delivery as well as external display output. But since you're using this for power, unless you have a dongle, you probably will be using the other port. And there is no HDMI, so it is using, again, either a mini display, you can get a converter, or use that Type-C to DisplayPort instead. There is Ethernet, however, for wired internet, and that single, again, full-size Type-A for USB. So that is also one thing where I do wish they would have maybe somehow squeezed in one more full-size USB port. I know it's tough because this thing is already crammed with I/O on all of the edges, but let's say you're trying to connect both a keyboard and a mouse. If it's not an all-in-one combo set, you have to use at least 2 USB slots, and so you have to use a dongle to kind of extend on the USB functionality. Otherwise, you can only choose one or the other. The bottom shell here is constructed out of aluminum alloy with some soft touch rubber that prevents it from sliding around, and this is a completely fanless mini PC because of the energy efficient Celeron chip that they've chosen. There's some thermal paste at the bottom, but it does get a little bit hot because it has to dissipate the heat to prevent any overheating, but it's completely quiet. It then transitions into a plastic polycarbonate on the very top section. But it is indeed super compact. Here it is next to an average phone around 6.5 inches, so you can tell this thing actually will slide easily into a pocket. So if you did want to travel with it for some reason or move it about, it's actually quite easy to do. Now to disassemble it, this is something that took me a little time to figure out, but you have to just pry on this plastic and it snaps off in a way like this. And there are actually 2 screws that I already removed, but you do need a screwdriver to actually open up the acrylic case. At first I thought it just simply slid out, but no, again, it requires this 2-step process. Using the screws, you can then pop off the acrylic, and removing this is the only way to then get access to the slot for popping in the RAM. And here's an example that we have here, 16GB, which is kind of interesting because it's branded by them if you're purchasing it from their store. So it looks like they even customized the PCB, which is, again, very densely packed. And Icewell also has an optional stand that you can pick up to really turn it into the aforementioned NAS mode. It's constructed entirely out of aluminum alloy and allows you to pop on the computer up top and then connect the 2 SSDs or hard drives below, so you have your own tiny little server there, quite cute on a desk. The finished result looking something like this. What I will say though is I would have liked for the design maybe to use some type of magnets. Obviously you can DIY that yourself, but right now the computer just is kind of loosely sitting up top instead of really snapping into place, and that means if you ever kind of tilt the entire stand, it might just move around a little bit, so be careful. Put it onto a flat surface though, and you should be mostly fine. Here's also a quick peek into the Casa OS environment as well as setup. So of course, as a Linux-based operating system, you can install this on other computers as well, but it's just pre-installed on the Zima board as well as the ZimaBlade, and you can tell that it's a little bit more catered towards the cloud backup and storage purpose, again, really advertising that NAS functionality, although it does also have a small app store that you can use to download some media players. If you want to, again, watch back movies, there's a basic web browser as well, so essential functions can still be found, but the dashboard here, as you can tell, is a little bit more catered towards file management and using it as a remote server. So you can also log into the site from other mobile devices as well as computers. It kind of mirrors the view that you have on the actual mini PC itself, and you're able to tell how much remaining storage is left in the connected drives, and you'll be able to manage everything remotely. So again, this allows you to access features such as that Home Assistant dashboard, and there is of course a command line like other Linux distributions if you prefer installing things that way instead of the GUI, but it's pretty intuitive even if you are just clicking around with the mouse, as you can tell. Of course, the App Store isn't going to be as exhaustive as, say, Mac or Windows, so you can expect the same level of support if you're trying to do more niche, say video editing, Photoshop work, things like that. It's not really built for it. However, for other simple purposes, like just for general web browsing, file management, it should be fine. Even media playback, there's a Plex app that's available in Casa OS as well. So it's kind of an up-and-coming, again, variant of Linux that has been used on this particular unit. You can also try other operating systems, like even Raspberry Pi OS. just with slightly higher end hardware inside compared to a real Raspberry Pi. Here is a handful of other apps that you can expect to find in the store. Again, just file browsers, Plex for media playback. And in order for you to talk to the virtual machine, aka NAS server, you have to be connected to the same wireless network. That is your phone, computer, as well as the mini computer here. So in order to kind of remotely get access to it, you just have to type into your browser casaos.local, and once both of these devices are connected to the same home network, you'll be able to enter that essentially VM environment. You'll see the same Casa OS appear on screen, sign in with your account for authentication, and then you'll be able to start, again, sharing files, backing them up over to your hard drives or SSDs. So relatively straightforward. That is, if you are using it primarily for file management as that NAS mode, I guess it can be already quite simple and it's easy enough out of the box. But of course, if you want to run other experiments, connect the aforementioned graphic cards to it using the PCIe slot up front, or use it for other operating systems, then obviously it would require a bit more tinkering, playing around with it. But there we have it. That's just our quick hands-on first look at the ZimaBlade mini PC. Again, really designed for enthusiasts as well as DIY hobbyists, developers, folks like that, as well as if you like the way it looks and you don't mind doing a bit of tinkering, then I suppose it could be an interesting alternative to some of the off-the-shelf models out there, even though a lot of the internals like the processor are still quite comparable to entry-level mini PCs running on Windows that we've seen in the past. But interesting as an alternative, again, to something like a Raspberry Pi. You can check out more details if interested in the links down below, but for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the ZimaBlade.